The cleaning lady's heart attack should have been fatal in an empty office building at midnight. But the security guard's combat medic training kicked in, and she survived because the man everyone ignored had once earned a Purple Heart saving soldiers' lives in a war zone. The Meridian office complex was a 12-story glass tower that housed insurance companies, law firms, and financial advisors during the day. But at night, it belonged to Robert Chen and the small crew of people who kept it running while the city slept. Robert had been the overnight security guard for 4 years, working the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift that most people couldn't handle. He was 54 years old, 5'8", with graying black hair and the kind of quiet presence that made him nearly invisible to the day shift employees who occasionally worked late. His routine never varied. Clock in at 10:55 p.m., check the security system, walk the building perimeter, then settle into the lobby desk where he monitored 47 security cameras that covered every floor, stairwell, and entrance. Most nights, nothing happened. Occasionally, he'd deal with a drunk trying to sleep in the parking garage or a delivery that arrived outside business hours. Robert preferred the quiet. He'd chosen night security work specifically because it involved minimal human interaction, predictable responsibilities, and plenty of time to think. After 20 years in the Army, he'd had enough of chaos, emergencies, and life-or-death decisions. What his co-workers didn't know was that Robert Chen had been Staff Sergeant Chen of the 68th Combat Support Hospital, 3rd Infantry Division. He'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic, treating battlefield injuries under conditions that would give most civilians nightmares. The Purple Heart license plate on his pickup truck told part of his story. Wounded in action while treating soldiers during a Taliban attack on his forward operating base. But Robert never talked about that day, just like he never talked about the other parts of his military service that had earned him commendations he kept locked in a closet at home. Maria Santos had been cleaning the Meridian office complex for 8 years, arriving at midnight and working until 6 a.m. to have the building spotless before employees arrived. She was 62 years old, originally from El Salvador, and had raised 3 children while working multiple cleaning jobs. Robert knew Maria's routine as well as his own. She'd start on the 12th floor and work her way down, methodically cleaning each office, emptying trash cans, and vacuuming carpets. They'd exchange polite greetings when she reached the lobby around 4 a.m., but neither spoke the other's language well enough for conversation. That Tuesday night started like any other. Robert was reviewing camera feeds when he noticed Maria moving more slowly than usual on the 8th floor. She paused frequently, leaning against desks and walls. At 2:47 a.m., she stopped completely and sat down heavily in an office chair. Robert watched the security monitor with growing concern. Maria was clutching her chest with one hand and reaching for her phone with the other. Then she dropped the phone and slumped forward. Robert's combat medic training kicked in before his conscious mind had time to process what was happening. He was already moving toward the elevator, his radio in one hand and emergency medical kit in the other, when the logical part of his brain caught up and confirmed what his instincts already knew. Maria was having a heart attack. Robert reached the 8th floor in less than 2 minutes, but those 2 minutes felt like an eternity. He'd called 911 from the elevator, giving dispatch a precise medical report and location, while his mind automatically ran through treatment protocols he hadn't used in civilian life. He found Maria unconscious in the chair, her breathing shallow and irregular, her skin pale and clammy. Robert checked for a pulse, weak and rapid, consistent with cardiac arrest. He immediately moved into the treatment mode that had saved lives in Afghanistan. "Maria, can you hear me?" he said in Spanish, one of several languages he'd learned during his military service. No response. Robert gently moved her to the floor, checked her airway, and began CPR with the mechanical precision of someone who had performed it dozens of times under much worse conditions. 15 compressions, 2 rescue breaths, check for pulse, Repeat. Robert's hands moved automatically while his mind calculated response times, assessed Maria's condition, and monitored for signs of improvement. This was muscle memory from treating wounded soldiers in a combat hospital where every second meant the difference between life and death. As he worked, Robert gave a running commentary to the 911 dispatcher using medical terminology that surprised the operator. Patient is a 62-year-old female experiencing cardiac arrest. I'm performing CPR. Compressions are effective. Airway is clear. ETA on paramedics? 3 minutes into CPR, Maria's pulse returned, weak but steady. Robert continued rescue breathing while monitoring her vital signs, speaking to her in both English and Spanish, keeping her conscious and calm until help arrived. The paramedics arrived 7 minutes after Robert's initial call, expecting to find a security guard in over his head and a patient in critical condition. Instead, they found a man performing textbook emergency medical care with the competence of a trained professional. "How long has she been down?" the lead paramedic asked as they took over treatment. Initial cardiac arrest at approximately 2:47 a.m. CPR started within 2 minutes. Pulse returned after 3 minutes of compressions. She's been conscious and responsive for the last 4 minutes. The paramedic looked up from his equipment. "You have medical training?" "Some," Robert replied, stepping back to give the team room to work. As the paramedics stabilized Maria for transport, the lead medic approached Robert again. "That wasn't some medical training, that was professional-level trauma response. Where did you learn that?" Robert hesitated. "Army, combat medic." "Recent?" "Retired 4 years ago." The paramedic nodded with new understanding. "Well, your training just saved her life. Clean CPR, proper airway management, accurate medical reporting. She's going to make it because you knew exactly what to do." As Maria was wheeled to the ambulance, now stable and conscious, she reached out and grabbed Robert's hand. "Gracias," she whispered. "Gracias por salvarme." Robert squeezed her hand gently. "De nada, Maria. Vas a estar bien." Word of Robert's medical response spread quickly through the building management company. The next evening, Robert was called into a meeting with his supervisor, Karen Mills, who had questions about the incident report. "Robert, the paramedics were very impressed with your response last night. They said you performed advanced life support procedures." "I just did what needed to be done." "But where did you learn those procedures? Your employment application doesn't mention any medical background." Robert had been dreading this conversation. "I was a medic in the Army. It didn't seem relevant to security work." Karen consulted the file in front of her. "Robert, you've been working here for 4 years, and this is the first time anyone has mentioned military service. The paramedics said you saved Maria's life using combat trauma techniques. I treated some injuries during my service." "What kind of injuries?" Robert was quiet for a long moment. "Combat injuries, battlefield trauma, IED attacks, gunshot wounds, shrapnel injuries, the kind of things you hope you never see again." Karen leaned forward. "Robert, how many soldiers did you treat during your deployments?" "I don't keep count." "Estimate?" "A few hundred, maybe more." Karen stared at him. "A few hundred battlefield casualties, and you never thought to mention this experience?" "Like I said, it didn't seem relevant to watching security cameras." Later that week, Karen did some research into Robert's military background. What she found was a service record that explained everything about the quiet, competent man who had been working the night shift for 4 years. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, 68th Combat Support Hospital, had served 3 tours in Afghanistan between 2010 and 2018. His military occupational specialty was 68W, Healthcare Specialist, commonly known as a combat medic. His service record included 3 Army Commendation Medals, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Purple Heart. The Purple Heart citation told the story of March 15, 2016, when Robert's forward operating base came under coordinated Taliban attack. While treating wounded soldiers in the base medical facility, an RPG round penetrated the building's outer wall. The explosion killed 2 patients and severely wounded Robert with shrapnel to his left shoulder and back, but he continued treating casualties for another hour before allowing himself to be evacuated. The Bronze Star citations described multiple incidents where Robert had risked his life to provide medical care under fire, including one mission where he treated 12 wounded soldiers during a 6-hour firefight, saving 11 lives. Another citation detailed how he had crawled 200 meters under enemy fire to reach a wounded helicopter pilot, performing field surgery that saved the man's life. But what impressed Karen most was a letter in Robert's personnel file from his commanding officer. Staff Sergeant Chen represents the finest traditions of military medical service. His calm under pressure, technical expertise, and dedication to saving lives has made him legendary among the soldiers he serves. He has single-handedly established our field hospital as the most effective trauma center in the region. His medical decisions under extreme combat conditions have directly resulted in the highest survival rate of any forward operating base in Afghanistan. The file also contained testimonials from soldiers Robert had treated. One letter from Private Johnson read, "Sergeant Chen saved my life twice, once when I stepped on an IED, and again 3 months later when I wanted to give up during recovery. He didn't just fix my body, he reminded me why I needed to live." Robert Chen wasn't just a former medic, he was a decorated war hero who had saved hundreds of lives using skills he'd acquired in the world's most dangerous combat zones, and whose compassion had helped wounded soldiers find the will to survive their injuries. Karen called Robert into another meeting, this time with a different agenda. "Robert, I've been learning about your military service. Why didn't you ever mention that you're a decorated combat veteran?" Robert shifted uncomfortably. "Because I wanted to be judged on how well I do this job, not on what I did in the Army." "But your medical skills could be valuable here. We have 300 employees in this building during the day. What if someone has a medical emergency? Then they should call 911 and wait for professional help." "Like you did with Maria?" "That was different. She would have died if I'd just waited." Karen studied Robert's face. "You've been hiding your qualifications because you don't want the responsibility." Robert was quiet for several minutes. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I spent 8 years making life-and-death decisions every day. I treated soldiers who were barely 18 years old, kids who were dying from injuries that no one should ever have to see. I saved a lot of lives, but I also lost some." He paused, looking out the office window at the city lights. "There was a soldier named Rodriguez, 19 years old, from Texas. IED blast took his legs and he was bleeding out. I worked on him for 40 minutes, did everything right, followed every protocol. But he died anyway, looking me in the eyes and asking me to tell his mother he loved her." Robert's hands tightened in his lap. "Or Martinez, who was supposed to go home the next week. Sniper round to the chest. I kept him alive long enough for the helicopter, but he died during surgery. 22 years old, engaged to be married." Karen listened without interrupting, understanding that Robert was sharing something he rarely talked about. "When I retired, I wanted a job where the worst thing that could happen was someone forgetting their key card. I didn't want to be responsible for saving lives anymore because every time I fail, someone doesn't go home to their family." "But you are responsible," Karen said gently. "That's who you are. You can't turn off training like that, and you shouldn't want to." "What if I make a mistake? What if someone dies because I'm not as good as I used to be?" "Robert, you just saved Maria's life using skills you learned in Afghanistan. You're exactly as good as you used to be, and more importantly, Maria gets to go home to her family because you didn't hesitate to help." Robert was quiet, processing Karen's words. "The soldiers you lost," Karen continued, "would they want you to stop saving lives because you couldn't save theirs?" "No," Robert said quietly. "They'd want me to keep going. Rodriguez made me promise to save others if I couldn't save him." A month later, the Meridian Office Complex implemented a new emergency response program with Robert as the designated first aid coordinator. His official job description didn't change. He was still the overnight security guard, but he now also carried advanced medical equipment and had authorization to provide emergency care until paramedics arrived. The building management company also enrolled Robert in continuing education courses to maintain his civilian medical certifications, and they publicized his availability to employees who might need emergency assistance. Robert was initially reluctant about the expanded role, but gradually he began to see it as a way to honor his military service while helping his civilian community. The first time he treated an employee's severe allergic reaction, saving her life with an EpiPen and proper medical care, he realized that his combat experience could serve a peaceful purpose. 3 months into his new role, Robert was called to assist with a construction accident in the building's parking garage. A worker had fallen from scaffolding and suffered multiple injuries. As Robert worked to stabilize the man, he found himself thinking about Rodriguez and Martinez, not with the crushing guilt he'd carried for years, but with a sense that he was fulfilling the promise he'd made to keep saving lives. The construction worker survived and made a full recovery. At the hospital, his wife thanked Robert through tears. "The doctors said if you hadn't been there, if you hadn't known exactly what to do, he wouldn't have made it." Robert realized that his military service hadn't ended when he left Afghanistan. It had just changed forms. Every life he saved in civilian settings honored the memory of the soldiers he couldn't save in combat. Maria returned to work 6 weeks after her heart attack, fully recovered and grateful to be alive. She brought Robert a card signed by her entire family, thanking him for giving her the chance to see her grandchildren grow up. "I still don't understand how you knew exactly what to do," she told him in Spanish. "I learned in Afghanistan," Robert replied, "and I'm glad I could help." She nodded thoughtfully. "My nephew is a soldier. I will tell him that there are people like you who never stop taking care of others, even after the war is over." Robert Chen still works the night shift at the Meridian Office Complex, still monitors the security cameras, still prefers the quiet hours when the building belongs to him and the small crew who keep it running. But now his co-workers know that the quiet man behind the security desk is someone who served his country with distinction, who saved lives under the worst possible conditions, and who continues to serve his community with the same dedication he once showed to his fellow soldiers. The Purple Heart license plate on his pickup truck is no longer just a license plate. It's a reminder that heroes don't stop being heroes when they hang up their uniforms. They just find new ways to serve, new people to protect, and new lives to save. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not in foreign countries, but in office buildings at 2 a.m., when someone's life depends on the skills of a person who never stopped caring, never stopped training, and never stopped serving. Sometimes the night shift isn't just about watching cameras and checking doors. Sometimes it's about being ready when someone needs you most, using skills learned in the world's most dangerous places to save lives in the most ordinary moments. So I ask you, have you ever met someone whose quiet night job masked extraordinary training? Someone who served in combat and continues serving in communities? Share their story in the comments. Because here on the Veteran Chronicles, we believe that true heroes never really retire. They just find new missions. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it. Help us honor the veterans who protect us in ways we never see, using skills we hope we never need.